I'll write the complete script for Breaking Iran Deploys Submarine Swarm near USS Gerald Ford Strike Group following the Andrew Unlimited Media Framework. Right now, at this exact moment, Iranian naval forces have positioned what defense analysts are calling an unprecedented submarine swarm within striking distance of the USS Gerald R. Ford carrier strike group in the eastern Mediterranean. Multiple intelligence sources confirm at least 7 Iranian submarines, including 3 Kilo-class diesel-electric boats and 4 domestically produced Fateh-class coastal submarines, have taken up coordinated positions in a tactical formation that the U.S. Fifth Fleet commander describes as highly unusual and deeply concerning. Tehran insists these are routine training exercises protected under international maritime law. The Pentagon characterizes the deployment as potentially threatening maneuvers that violate established norms of naval engagement. This marks the first time Iran has successfully deployed multiple submarine assets simultaneously in waters hosting a U.S. carrier battle group, fundamentally altering the strategic calculus in a region already teetering on the edge of open conflict. Let me walk you through exactly what happened in the 72 hours leading to this crisis. At 0340 UTC on March 4, 2026, the guided missile destroyer USS Arleigh Burke, operating as part of the Ford Strike Group's outer defensive screen approximately 180 nautical miles northwest of Crete at coordinates 36, 2° Ain, 23, 1° E, detected anomalous acoustic signatures consistent with submarine activity. The destroyer's AN/SQS-53C sonar system registered what sonar technicians initially classified as a single contact bearing 0.95 degrees relative range approximately 42,000 yards. Within 18 minutes, at 0358 UTC, 2 additional contacts appeared on passive sonar arrays, creating what naval doctrine calls a multi-bearing threat scenario. By 0600 UTC, the USS Porter, a second Arleigh Burke-class destroyer positioned 35 nautical miles to the southeast, confirmed detection of at least 2 additional submarine contacts operating in what appeared to be coordinated movement patterns. The tactical picture became dramatically more complex at 1125 UTC, when P-8A Poseidon Maritime Patrol aircraft operating from Naval Air Station Sigonella deployed sonobuoys in an expanding search pattern and identified 3 more subsurface contacts within a 90 nautical mile radius of the carrier strike group's estimated position. By 1800 UTC on March 5, U.S. Naval Forces Central Command had classified the situation as a complex undersea threat environment, requiring enhanced defensive protocols. Intelligence assessments based on acoustic signatures, operating depths ranging from 120 to 180 meters, and known Iranian submarine capabilities identified the contacts as a mixed force. 3 Project 877 EKM Kilo-class submarines acquired from Russia between 1992 and 1996, designated in Iranian service as Tarek, Noor, and Yunus, and 4 Fateh-class coastal submarines, including the Fateh herself, Shaheen, Besat, and the newly commissioned Zulfikar. What makes this deployment extraordinary is not merely the number of boats involved, but their coordinated positioning in what Western naval analysts recognize as a Soviet-era pack tactics formation specifically designed to overwhelm carrier battle group defenses through simultaneous multi-axis attack vectors. Understanding why this submarine deployment represents such a significant shift in Middle Eastern naval warfare requires examining the specific capabilities these Iranian boats bring to the tactical environment. The 3 Kilo-class submarines at the core of this formation represent Iran's most capable conventional submarine assets. Each Kilo displaces 3,076 tons submerged, measures 73.8 meters in length, and can sustain underwater operations for up to 45 days with a crew of 52. Their maximum submerged speed of 17 knots, while modest by modern standards, becomes tactically significant when combined with exceptional quieting features that earn the Kilo class its NATO reporting name, Black Hole, for its acoustic stealth characteristics. Each submarine carries 18 weapons in 6 533mm torpedo tubes, typically a mix of Test 71 1ME electric torpedoes with 15-kilometer range and 205-kilogram warheads, and 53 65 KE wake-homing torpedoes effective to 19 kilometers. More concerning from a strategic perspective, intelligence assessments indicate at least 2 of Iran's Kilo boats have been modified to carry the Hoot supercavitating torpedo, a reverse-engineered variant of the Russian Shkval, capable of speeds exceeding 200 knots underwater, though with reduced range of only 8 to 13 kilometers. The Kilo's greatest asset remains its ability to operate in what submariners call the quiet zone, maintaining near absolute acoustic silence while running on battery power at speeds below 3 knots, making detection extremely difficult even with advanced sonar systems. The 4 Fateh-class coastal submarines represent a different threat profile optimized for littoral warfare in confined waters. These smaller boats displace only 600 tons submerged, measure 48 meters in length, and operate with crews of 21. Their maximum speed of 11 knots submerged and operational endurance of only 35 days make them less capable in open ocean operations. But their shallow water capabilities are precisely what makes them dangerous in the eastern Mediterranean's complex bathymetric environment. Each Fateh carries 4 533mm torpedo tubes with 8 weapons, and their small size allows operation in waters as shallow as 50 meters, where larger submarines cannot safely maneuver. Iranian state media claims the Fateh class incorporates air-independent propulsion technology, though Western intelligence remains skeptical of these assertions, with most analysts believing these boats use conventional diesel-electric systems with enhanced battery capacity. What transforms these individual capabilities into a strategic threat is their coordinated employment. The tactical formation intelligence sources have identified places the 3 deep-water Kilo boats in a triangle formation with vertices approximately 40 nautical miles apart, creating a barrier zone through which the forward strike group would have to transit to reach potential strike positions closer to Middle Eastern littoral areas. The 4 Fateh boats occupy interior positions within this triangle, creating a layered defense that complicates any attempt to clear the subsurface threat through conventional anti-submarine warfare measures. This disposition reflects advanced understanding of modern carrier battlegroup defensive doctrine, specifically targeting the gaps in sonar coverage that inevitably exist in the transition zones between different water temperatures and salinity layers that characterize Mediterranean oceanography. The strategic context surrounding this submarine deployment reveals calculations from multiple state actors, each operating according to distinct but intersecting strategic logics that make this crisis particularly volatile. From Tehran's perspective, this operation represents what Iranian strategic culture calls revolutionary deterrence through asymmetric naval warfare, a doctrine developed specifically to counter overwhelming U.S. conventional superiority through methods that exploit perceived vulnerabilities in American power projection capabilities. According to Dr. Afshan Ostavar, Associate Professor of National Security Affairs at the Naval Postgraduate School and author of Vanguard of the Imam, Religion, Politics, and Iran's Revolutionary Guards, Iranian naval strategy since the 1980s has centered on creating what military theorists call an anti-access area denial environment, specifically designed to impose unacceptable costs on U.S. naval forces operating in the Persian Gulf and surrounding waters. The submarine swarm tactic extends this A280 concept into new geographic space, demonstrating Iranian capability to project naval power beyond traditional operating areas in the Strait of Hormuz and Gulf of Oman. The timing of this deployment correlates directly with escalating tensions over Iran's nuclear program, specifically the breakdown of negotiations in Vienna 3 weeks ago when Western powers rejected Iranian demands for guaranteed sanctions relief. From the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy's perspective, which controls all Iranian submarine operations, demonstrating the ability to threaten U.S. carrier operations serves multiple strategic purposes. It signals resolve in ongoing diplomatic confrontations, demonstrates military capabilities that support deterrence of potential U.S. or Israeli strikes against Iranian nuclear facilities, and enhances Iran's regional prestige by showcasing naval power projection that few Middle Eastern states can match. The United States faces equally complex strategic calculations shaped by decades of carrier-centric naval doctrine and global force posture requirements. According to Admiral James Stavridis, former Supreme Allied Commander Europe and Dean Emeritus of the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts University, American naval strategy since World War II has relied fundamentally on the carrier battle group as the primary instrument of sea control and power projection, making any demonstrated vulnerability to submarine attack strategically consequential far beyond the immediate tactical situation. The Ford Strike Group's presence in the eastern Mediterranean serves multiple mission sets simultaneously, providing strike options against potential targets in Syria and Lebanon, supporting NATO's southeastern flank, demonstrating commitment to Israeli security, and maintaining freedom of navigation in contested waters. The submarine threat complicates all these missions by forcing defensive reorientation of assets originally tasked for offensive operations. More significantly, the situation creates what deterrence theorists call an escalation management dilemma, aggressively prosecuting the Iranian submarines through active sonobuoy deployment, aggressive maneuvering by ASW assets, or even weapons release under permissive rules of engagement risks triggering exactly the crisis scenario the deployment was designed to deter. Conversely, adopting passive defensive postures that avoid escalation risks emboldening Iranian naval forces to expand their operating areas and tactics, potentially establishing precedents that undermine broader U.S. naval strategy across multiple theaters. The Russian dimension adds further complexity to this strategic environment. Intelligence analysts note the Kilo submarines involved in this deployment all underwent maintenance and upgrade work at Russia's Sevmash shipyard in Severodvinsk between 2019 and 2023, raising questions about potential technical assistance, intelligence sharing, or even tactical coordination between Russian and Iranian naval forces. Russia maintains a permanent naval presence at Tartus, Syria, approximately 380 nautical miles northeast of the current crisis zone, and Russian maritime patrol aircraft have increased reconnaissance flights over the eastern Mediterranean by 40% in the past 10 days, according to data from the NATO Maritime Command. While no evidence suggests direct Russian involvement in planning or executing the Iranian submarine deployment, the operational convergence creates opportunities for intelligence collection on U.S. anti-submarine warfare capabilities that serve Russian strategic interests. Historical precedents offer limited guidance for this situation precisely because it combines elements that have never occurred simultaneously in modern naval warfare. The closest analog appears to be the 1982 Falklands War, when the British nuclear submarine HMS Conqueror sank the Argentine cruiser General Belgrano, demonstrating the vulnerability of surface forces to submarine attack and fundamentally shaping the remainder of the conflict's naval operations. The key difference is that situation involved actual combat between submarines and surface vessels, whereas the current crisis operates in the ambiguous gray zone between peacetime operations and open warfare, where rules of engagement remain uncertain and escalation risks are maximally unpredictable. Three distinct scenarios could emerge from this crisis, each with different probability weightings based on current strategic incentives and tactical constraints. The diplomatic de-escalation scenario, which I assess at approximately 30% probability, requires specific conditions to materialize over the next 48 to 72 hours. In this pathway, Iranian submarines gradually withdraw from their current positions through a face-saving mechanism that allows Tehran to claim successful demonstration of naval capability while avoiding direct confrontation. This outcome becomes more likely if back-channel communications between Washington and Tehran, potentially mediated through Swiss diplomatic channels or Omani intermediaries, establish mutual understanding that both sides gain sufficient strategic signaling value from the current standoff without requiring additional escalation. The Ford Strike Group would adjust its course to maintain greater distance from Iranian submarine positions while continuing its broader eastern Mediterranean mission, essentially creating de facto separation zones that reduce immediate tactical tensions. Observable indicators that would suggest movement toward this scenario include reduction in Iranian state media coverage of the submarine deployment within 24 hours, suggesting authorities no longer require domestic propaganda value from the operation. Adjustment of the Ford Strike Group's course to a more northwesterly heading away from Middle Eastern littoral areas, visible through commercial ship tracking data and satellite imagery. Decrease in US P-8A Poseidon flight operations from Sigonella, indicating reduced ASW prosecution efforts, statements from Iranian officials characterizing the deployment as a successful completion of training exercises rather than ongoing operations, and increased diplomatic contacts between U.S. and Iranian officials through third-party channels, potentially detectable through unusual travel patterns of known intermediaries. The controlled military escalation scenario, which I assess at 40% probability, involves a calculated increase in military activities by both sides that stops short of weapons release but significantly raises operational tempo and crisis intensity. In this pathway, U.S. forces dramatically expand anti-submarine warfare operations, deploying additional P-8A aircraft, potentially routing attack submarines from other operating areas to the eastern Mediterranean, and conducting aggressive active sonar prosecution of Iranian contacts that forces them to maneuver defensively or surface. Iranian forces respond by maintaining their submarine positions, potentially adding surface vessels from the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy, and increasing rhetoric about defending territorial waters and international rights against American aggression. This scenario creates what crisis management theorists call a competition in risk-taking, where each side incrementally increases pressure to test the other's resolve while maintaining just enough control to avoid irreversible escalation into actual combat. The strategic logic supporting this pathway stems from both sides' interest in demonstrating resolve to domestic audiences and international observers, while recognizing that actual combat would impose costs neither leadership structure currently wants to accept. The danger in this scenario lies in accidents, miscalculations, or unauthorized actions by tactical-level commanders operating under stress in complex environments where standard operating procedures may not adequately address unprecedented situations. Observable indicators suggesting movement toward controlled escalation include deployment of additional U.S. attack submarines to the Mediterranean, potentially visible through pier departures from submarine bases in Groton, Connecticut or Kings Bay, Georgia, within 48 hours. Increase in active sonar transmissions detectable through commercial underwater acoustic monitoring networks. Iranian state media releasing additional details about submarine deployments, including specific vessel names or commander identities, suggesting desire to heighten public profile of the operation. Activation of additional Iranian naval assets, including surface vessels or coastal anti-ship missile batteries, and statements from U.S. officials explicitly naming Iran as responsible for threatening activities, representing diplomatic escalation from current more ambiguous characterizations. The catastrophic escalation scenario, which I assess at 25% probability despite its potentially devastating consequences, involves actual weapons release by either side, followed by rapid expansion of combat operations. This pathway could begin through several triggering mechanisms: an Iranian submarine commander interpreting aggressive U.S. ASW prosecution as imminent attack and launching torpedoes defensively, a U.S. destroyer or submarine receiving authorization under updated rules of engagement to engage Iranian submarines that approach within a designated threat radius, or a genuine accident such as collision between submarines operating in close proximity at depth. Once weapons are released, both military doctrines and political pressures create powerful incentives toward expansion rather than immediate de-escalation. U.S. forces would likely prosecute all Iranian submarines aggressively to eliminate the subsurface threat before they can conduct additional attacks. Iranian forces would interpret any combat action as the beginning of a broader American military campaign, potentially triggering pre-planned responses including anti-ship missile strikes from coastal batteries, mine deployment in key maritime choke points, and activation of proxy forces throughout the region. The strategic catastrophe in this scenario stems less from the direct military consequences, where U.S. forces possess overwhelming conventional superiority, than from the regional political chain reaction. Israeli security planners might interpret U.S.-Iranian naval combat as opportunity or necessity to strike Iranian nuclear facilities before Tehran can retaliate against American attacks, with regional escalation targeting Israel. Saudi Arabia and other Gulf states would face immediate pressure to clarify their positions in an active U.S. Iran conflict, with potential for attacks on oil infrastructure that could spike global energy prices and trigger economic crisis. Russia faces incentives to exploit American distraction in the Middle East through more aggressive actions in Ukraine or elsewhere, while China could use the crisis to advance interests in the Taiwan Strait or South China Sea. Observable indicators that would suggest drift toward this most dangerous scenario include changes in U.S. rules of engagement communicated through encrypted military channels but potentially detectable through unusual message traffic patterns, or deployment of legal advisors to operational commands. Iranian submarines changing depth profiles or increasing speed, suggesting transition from monitoring to attack positioning. Evacuation of non-essential U.S. embassy personnel from regional capitals. Activation of U.S. military reserve forces or alert status changes at bases throughout the Middle East, and intelligence indicators of Iranian preparation for broader military operations such as movement of mobile missile systems or increased activity at Revolutionary Guard facilities. Over the next 24 to 72 hours, 5 specific indicators will determine which scenario materializes. First, monitor the Ford Strike Group's heading and speed through naval vessel tracking platforms. Any significant course change away from Middle Eastern operating areas, particularly movement toward the Strait of Gibraltar suggesting Mediterranean exit, would indicate de-escalation. Conversely, maintenance of current course or movement closer to Syrian or Lebanese waters, despite submarine presence, suggests controlled escalation or worse. Second, watch Iranian state media coverage intensity and framing. Decrease in coverage or shift to retrospective framing about completed exercises indicates de-escalation. Sustained or increasing coverage with aggressive rhetoric about defending rights against American imperialism suggests controlled escalation pathway. Third, track USP-8A Poseidon deployment through aircraft spotting networks around Sigonella. Reduction in flight operations indicates de-escalation. Increase, particularly deployment of additional aircraft from US-based squadrons, suggests controlled escalation. Fourth, monitor diplomatic channels through travel of known intermediaries and statements from Swiss or Omani officials. Increased diplomatic activity suggests de-escalation efforts. Radio silence from normal intermediary channels suggests both sides accepting higher crisis levels. Fifth, watch for changes in commercial shipping patterns through the Suez Canal and Eastern Mediterranean. Major shipping companies rerouting away from the area based on their own intelligence and risk assessments would indicate private sector expectations of potential combat, often a more reliable indicator than official statements. What we're witnessing in the waters of the Eastern Mediterranean represents more than a tactical submarine deployment or another episode in the ongoing US-Iran confrontation. This crisis demonstrates the evolution of naval warfare into domains where traditional American advantages in carrier-based power projection face challenges from asymmetric capabilities developed specifically to exploit vulnerabilities inherent in surface-centric naval doctrine. The 7 Iranian submarines currently operating in coordinated formation near the USS Gerald Ford Carrier Strike Group have already achieved strategic effect regardless of what happens in the next 72 hours. They have demonstrated Iranian capability to project naval power beyond traditional operating areas. They have forced the U.S. Navy to divert assets from offensive mission sets to defensive anti-submarine warfare. They have created global awareness of American carrier vulnerability to undersea threats. Most significantly, they have established a precedent that other potential adversaries, particularly China and Russia, will study intensively to inform their own strategies for challenging U.S. naval dominance. The immediate stakes remain the physical security of thousands of American sailors aboard the Ford and her escorts, the maintenance of credible deterrence in a region where perceived weakness invites aggression, and the prevention of miscalculation that could trigger combat with unpredictable regional and global consequences. But the longer-term stakes involve fundamental questions about the future of naval warfare, the sustainability of America's carrier-centric maritime strategy, and the balance of power in maritime domains that have underwritten global trade and security architecture for 8 decades. This channel will continue providing real-time monitoring and analysis as this crisis develops. Unlike mainstream media coverage that offers superficial reporting on complex military situations, we deliver the technical depth and strategic context you need to actually understand what's happening and why it matters. If you want to stay ahead of breaking developments in this crisis, if you want analysis that respects your intelligence and provides genuine insight rather than recycled talking points, hit that subscribe button right now and activate notifications so you never miss an update. This situation is evolving hour by hour, and we'll be here tracking every development with the same level of detail and analytical rigor you've seen in this video. I want to hear your perspective in the comments. First, do you think the Iranian submarine deployment represents a genuinely new strategic capability, or is this primarily a propaganda operation with limited actual military significance? Second, how should the United States balance the need to maintain credible deterrence against the risk of escalation into actual combat that serves neither side's interests? Third, What does this crisis tell us about the future viability of carrier battle groups in contested environments against peer or near-peer adversaries? These aren't simple questions with obvious answers, and I'm genuinely interested in the strategic thinking of this community. Leave your detailed analysis in the comments, engage with other viewers' perspectives, and let's build the kind of serious strategic discussion that this crisis demands and deserves. Right now, somewhere beneath the surface of the Eastern Mediterranean, Iranian submarine crews and American anti-submarine warfare specialists are engaged in a deadly serious game of cat and mouse where a single miscalculation could trigger consequences that reshape the entire Middle Eastern security environment. Every hour that passes without diplomatic resolution increases the probability of accident or miscalculation. Every tactical decision made by commanders operating with imperfect information under enormous pressure carries strategic weight far beyond the immediate situation. The next 72 hours will determine whether this crisis becomes a footnote in the ongoing U.S.-Iran confrontation or the trigger point for a regional conflagration that draws in multiple state actors and destabilizes global energy markets. Stay informed, stay engaged, and stay tuned to this channel for the analysis you need to understand what happens next.